The alley swallowed light whole. Two figures cornered a woman against the graffiti-scarred wall, their shadows stretching like predators closing in for the kill. Her scream cut through the night, but in this forgotten corner of the city, screams died alone. Derek Callahan didn't let this one die. His boots hit concrete before fear could whisper retreat. Knuckles met jaw. A body hit the ground. The second man fled into the darkness he came from, and then silence broken only by her ragged breathing and the distant wail of a siren that would never come this way. The woman called herself Vivian. She stood trembling in a simple blouse, but her hands were too soft, her posture too refined for these broken streets. A stranger, completely out of place. Derek didn't ask who she really was. He didn't ask why someone like her wandered into a neighborhood like this. He simply said, "You're safe now. Come with me." What Derek couldn't know was that this single act of courage would crack open a door to a world where everything he believed about luck, love, and second chances would be tested beyond recognition. The smell of motor oil and rust clung to Derek Callahan's skin like a second layer, a permanent reminder of the 12-hour shifts he pulled 6 days a week at Henderson's auto repair. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of wrestling with engines and transmissions, gripped the worn leather of his tool bag as he walked down Marigold Street. The streetlights here flickered more than they shone, casting the cracked sidewalks in pools of amber that came and went like dying heartbeats. This was the east side of the city, where dreams came to suffocate and hope learned to crawl instead of walk. Derek had lived here for 7 years, ever since his wife walked out and left him with a 2-month-old baby and a mountain of debt she'd accumulated in secret. He never blamed her for leaving. He blamed himself for not seeing it coming. At 34, Derek carried himself with the quiet exhaustion of a man who had learned to expect nothing and fight for everything. His apartment sat on the 3rd floor of a building that should have been condemned a decade ago, where the elevator hadn't worked since the Clinton administration and the heating system wheezed through winters like an old man with pneumonia. But it was home. It was the place where his son Austin learned to walk, where they ate cereal for dinner on the nights the money ran thin, where they built pillow forts and pretended the water stains on the ceiling were maps to buried treasure. Austin was 7 now, with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He was the only thing Derek had ever done right, and every callus on his hands was a badge of honor, earned in the name of keeping that boy fed, clothed, and believing that tomorrow could be better than today. The night air bit through Derek's jacket as he turned onto Bleecker Avenue, a shortcut through the industrial district that shaved 15 minutes off his walk home. He was thinking about the math worksheet Austin had struggled with that morning, wondering if he could find time to help him practice before bed, when the scream shattered his thoughts like a brick through glass. It came from the alley between the abandoned textile factory and the boarded-up convenience store, a sound so raw and desperate that it bypassed Derek's brain entirely and spoke directly to his spine. His body was moving before his mind caught up, boots pounding against cracked asphalt, heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape the cage of bone that held it prisoner. The alley was a wound in the urban landscape, a narrow passage where shadows bred and garbage rotted in peace. 2 men had a woman pinned against the graffiti-scarred wall, their bodies blocking her escape, their laughter echoing off the brick like shattered glass. One of them had his hand on her throat. The other was rifling through her purse, tossing lipstick and keys aside like worthless trinkets. She was fighting, clawing at the hand that choked her, her eyes wild with terror and defiance. Derek didn't announce himself. He didn't shout a warning or demand they stop. He simply closed the distance in 4 long strides and introduced his fist to the jaw of the man holding her throat. The impact traveled up his arm like electricity, familiar and satisfying. The man crumpled like wet cardboard, his skull bouncing off the concrete with a sound that would echo in Derek's memory for weeks. The second man spun around, dropping the purse, reaching for something in his waistband. Derek didn't give him time to find it. He grabbed the man by the collar of his jacket and slammed him into the wall, once, twice, until the fight drained from his eyes and he slid down the brick like spilled paint. The whole confrontation lasted maybe 12 seconds. Derek stood in the center of the alley, breathing hard, his knuckles throbbing, watching as the first man scrambled to his feet and dragged his unconscious partner into the darkness. They disappeared like cockroaches fleeing the light, leaving behind nothing but the woman's scattered belongings and the ghost of her scream still hanging in the air. She was pressed against the wall, her chest heaving, her eyes fixed on Derek with an expression he couldn't quite read. Fear, certainly, but something else too, something that looked almost like wonder. She was dressed simply, a white blouse and dark slacks, sensible flats that were now scuffed and dirty. But there was something about her that didn't fit this neighborhood, this alley, this moment. Her posture was too straight, her features too composed despite the terror she'd just experienced. Her hands, when she finally lowered them from her throat, were smooth and manicured, unmarked by labor or hardship. She looked like a photograph that had been placed in the wrong album, a creature from another world who had somehow wandered into the wrong dimension. "Are you hurt?" Derek asked, keeping his voice low and steady. She shook her head, still staring at him like he might vanish if she blinked. "Can you walk?" Another nod. He bent down and gathered her scattered belongings, stuffing them back into her purse with hands that were still trembling slightly from adrenaline. When he straightened, he noticed the watch on her wrist, a delicate thing of gold and diamonds that probably cost more than he made in a year. He said nothing about it. "What's your name?" "Vivian," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the hand that had been wrapped around her throat. "My car ran out of gas about 6 blocks from here. My phone died. I was trying to find a gas station, and I got turned around, and then those men appeared out of nowhere. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I just ran, and they followed, and I thought I was going to die. I really thought I was going to." The words tumbled out of her in a flood, tears cutting tracks down her cheeks, her composure finally cracking under the weight of what had almost happened. Derek let her talk. He knew from experience that words were sometimes the only thing standing between a person and total collapse. When she finally ran out of breath, he handed her the purse and said the only thing that made sense. "You're safe now. Come with me." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his oil-stained jacket and his rough hands and his tired eyes. He expected her to refuse. He expected her to ask for a phone, to call a cab, to find some way of escaping this neighborhood and the stranger who inhabited it. Instead, she nodded and fell into step beside him as he walked toward the mouth of the alley, toward the flickering streetlights and the broken sidewalks and the third-floor apartment where his son was waiting. The walk to Derek's building took 7 minutes, but it felt like an hour. Vivian walked close beside him, her shoulder occasionally brushing his arm, her eyes darting to every shadow and every sound. He told her about the neighborhood as they walked, pointing out the bodega where Mrs. Hernandez sold the best tamales in the city, the basketball court where the teenagers gathered on summer nights, the mural on the side of the community center that the local kids had painted last spring. He talked to fill the silence, to give her something to focus on besides the memory of those hands on her throat. By the time they reached his building, her breathing had steadied and the color had returned to her cheeks. The stairwell smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke, but Vivian climbed the 3 flights without complaint. Derek unlocked his door and led her into the apartment, watching her face as she took in the cramped living room with its second-hand furniture and the kitchen where dishes sat drying on a rack beside the sink. He waited for the judgment, the polite disgust, the moment when she would realize exactly how far she had fallen from her own world. It didn't come. Instead, her eyes found the photographs on the wall, the images of Derek and Austin at the park, at the zoo, at the beach that one magical weekend when he'd saved up enough for a day trip. Her expression softened into something that looked almost like longing. "Is that your son?" she asked, pointing to a photo of Austin blowing out candles on a birthday cake. "Austin," Derek said. "He's 7. He's asleep in the back room. I should check on him." He left Vivian in the living room and pushed open the door to Austin's bedroom, a tiny space that barely fit the twin bed and the dresser covered in action figures. Austin was sprawled across the mattress, one arm hanging over the edge, his mouth slightly open, lost in whatever dreams visited 7-year-old boys on Thursday nights. Derek pulled the blanket up to his chin, pressed a kiss to his forehead, and whispered a promise he made every night. "I'll always keep you safe." When he returned to the living room, Vivian was sitting on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap, looking smaller and more vulnerable than she had in the alley. He made them both tea, apologizing for the chipped cups and the generic brand, and sat down in the chair across from her. They talked until 3 in the morning. Vivian told him about her car, a rental she'd been driving because her own was in the shop, and how she'd been working late and taken a wrong turn trying to find a shortcut home. She didn't say what she did for work, and he didn't ask. He told her about Austin, about the math worksheets and the pillow forts and the way the kid could make him laugh even on the worst days. He told her about Henderson's auto repair and the satisfaction of bringing a dead engine back to life. He didn't tell her about the bills he couldn't pay or the second job he was thinking about taking or the way exhaustion had become his constant companion. Some things were too heavy to share with strangers, even strangers with kind eyes and soft hands and watches that cost more than his rent. When Vivian finally fell asleep on the couch, Derek covered her with the blanket Austin used when they watched movies together and turned off the lights. He sat in the chair by the window, watching the sky slowly lighten from black to gray to pink, thinking about the strange turns life could take. He didn't know who this woman really was. He didn't know why someone like her had been wandering alone through his neighborhood at night, but he knew that he'd done the right thing. And in a world that so often rewarded cruelty and punished kindness, that had to count for something. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the sound of Austin's voice asking who the lady on the couch was. Derek intercepted him in the hallway, explaining in whispers that she was a friend who needed help, and that they should let her sleep. Austin accepted this with the easy trust of childhood and went about his morning routine, eating cereal and getting dressed for school with only occasional curious glances toward the living room. When Vivian finally woke, her eyes puffy and her hair disheveled, Austin was waiting by the front door with his backpack, ready to leave. "This is Austin," Derek said, and his son gave her a shy wave. "Austin, this is Miss Vivian. Did my dad rescue you?" Austin asked with the blunt honesty only children possess. "He's really good at rescuing people. He rescued a cat from a tree once, and he rescued Mrs. Patterson when she fell down the stairs, and he rescued me from a really scary spider last week." Vivian laughed, the first genuine laugh Derek had heard from her, and the sound transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "Your dad is very brave," she said, kneeling down to Austin's level. "He's a hero. You should be very proud of him." "I know," Austin said matter-of-factly. "He's the best dad in the whole world." Derek felt something crack open in his chest, some small wall he'd built around the part of himself that still hoped for things. He cleared his throat and told Austin to wait outside for Mrs. Hernandez, who walked him to school every morning in exchange for help carrying her groceries on Saturdays. When the door closed behind him, the apartment suddenly felt very quiet and very small. Vivian stood up and smoothed her rumpled blouse, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time in daylight. Derek waited for her to say goodbye, to thank him for his help, and disappear back into whatever world she'd come from. "I need to get my car," she said instead. "Would you help me?" "I can call a tow truck, but I don't know exactly where I left it, and I'm not sure I could find my way back alone." They walked 6 blocks to where her rental sat abandoned on the side of the road, hazard lights still blinking weakly. Derek popped the hood and confirmed what she already knew. Empty tank, no mechanical problems. He called a roadside assistance service from her now charged phone and waited with her until the truck arrived with a can of gas. The whole time, Vivian kept glancing at him, opening her mouth to say something and then closing it again, as if the words she needed didn't exist in any language she knew. "Thank you," she finally said as the tow truck driver finished filling her tank. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "Don't think about that," Derek said. "It didn't happen. That's what matters." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, pressing it into his hand with an intensity that surprised him. "If you ever need anything," she said. "Anything at all, Please call me. He looked at the card. Vivian Rhodes, CEO, Rhodes Technologies. The logo was familiar, something he'd seen on billboards and in magazine ads, associated with smartphones and tablets and software that changed the world. He looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly all the pieces fell into place. The watch, the posture, the sense of a creature displaced from its natural habitat. He was holding the business card of one of the most powerful women in the city, a woman whose face graced the covers of business magazines and whose name was spoken with reverence in boardrooms across the country. "You're Vivian Rhodes," he said, his voice flat with disbelief. "I'm the woman whose life you saved," she corrected gently. "Everything else is just titles and buildings and things that don't matter nearly as much as people pretend they do." She got in her car and drove away, leaving Derek standing on the sidewalk with a business card in his hand and a strange feeling in his chest that he couldn't quite name. He went to work that day and told no one what had happened. He came home that night and helped Austin with his math homework and made spaghetti for dinner and read stories until his son fell asleep. He put Vivian's business card in the drawer of his nightstand and tried to forget about it, tried to convince himself that their paths would never cross again. He was wrong. 3 days later, a black sedan pulled up outside Henderson's auto repair just as Derek was finishing his shift. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door, and Vivian Rhodes emerged like a vision from another reality, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than everything Derek owned combined. She walked into the garage with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, but her eyes were uncertain when they found his, almost nervous. "I came to check on you," she said, "and to thank you properly." "You already thanked me," Derek replied, wiping his hands on a rag that did nothing to remove the grease. "No, I thanked you the way a stranger thanks a stranger. That's not enough. Not for what you did." She invited him to dinner. He said no. She asked again, this time mentioning that Austin could come too, that she knew a restaurant where they served the best chocolate cake in the city. Derek said no again, but Austin had overheard from across the garage, where he was doing homework in the break room, and suddenly his son was standing beside him with eyes as wide as dinner plates. "Dad," Austin whispered urgently. She said chocolate cake. The best chocolate cake in the city. Derek looked at his son, at Vivian, at the absurd collision of worlds that had somehow become his life. He thought about all the reasons he should say no, all the ways this could complicate his carefully constructed existence. Then he thought about the way Austin's face had lit up at the mention of cake, and he knew he'd already lost. "One dinner," he said. "That's it." Vivian's smile could have powered the entire neighborhood for a week. The restaurant was the kind of place Derek had only seen in movies. All white tablecloths and crystal chandeliers and waiters who looked like they'd been trained at some secret school for elegant service. Austin spent the first 10 minutes with his jaw hanging open, whispering questions about why there were so many forks and whether rich people really ate snails. Vivian answered every question with patience and humor, never once making the boy feel small or foolish. She ordered him the chocolate cake before dinner, ignoring the waiter's raised eyebrow, and Austin decided in that moment that she was the greatest person he'd ever met, besides his father. Over the following weeks, Vivian became a regular presence in their lives. She would show up at the garage with lunch, sit in the break room helping Austin with homework, listen to Derek's stories about difficult customers and impossible repairs. She took them to the zoo, to the aquarium, to a baseball game where Austin caught a foul ball and screamed so loud Derek thought his eardrums might burst. She never mentioned money, never flaunted her wealth, never made them feel like charity cases. She was simply Vivian, the woman who laughed at Austin's jokes and remembered how Derek took his coffee and fit into their small, imperfect life like a puzzle piece they hadn't known was missing. It happened so gradually that Derek didn't see it coming. The way his heart lifted when her name appeared on his phone, the way he found himself thinking about her at odd moments during the day, the way her hand felt when it accidentally brushed his, sending electricity through his entire body. He was falling in love with Vivian Rhodes, and the realization terrified him more than anything he'd faced in that alley. "Dad," Austin said one night as Derek was tucking him in, "is Miss Vivian going to be my new mom?" Derek froze. his hand still on the blanket. Why would you ask that, buddy? Because you look at her the way Mr. Henderson looks at Mrs. Henderson, and she looks at you the same way. And when I pray at night, I always ask for a mom, and maybe God sent her. Derek didn't know what to say. He kissed Austin's forehead and turned off the light and sat in the dark living room for a long time, thinking about prayers and miracles and the 1,000 ways a heart could break. The news hit like a bomb on a quiet Tuesday morning. Derek was at work when his phone exploded with notifications, headlines screaming about billionaire CEO Vivian Rhodes and her secret romance with a mechanic from the wrong side of town. Someone had taken photos of them at the baseball game, at the park, walking down the street holding hands. The tabloids had a field day, painting Derek as a gold digger and Vivian as a naive fool who had lost her mind. Within hours, the story was everywhere, inescapable, poisoning everything it touched. Vivian called him that afternoon, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "The board called an emergency meeting," she said. "They're demanding I end this relationship. They say it's damaging the company's image, affecting stock prices. They're threatening to remove me as CEO." Derek felt his world tilt on its axis. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," she whispered, and for the first time since he'd known her, she sounded lost. "I've spent 20 years building this company. It's everything I have, everything I am. Then maybe you should listen to them." Silence. Then, "Is that what you want?" "It doesn't matter what I want, Vivian. I'm just a mechanic from the East Side. I was never supposed to be part of your world." "Don't," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't you dare make this decision for me. Don't you dare tell me what I should want." She hung up, and Derek stood in the garage with the phone in his hand, feeling like something precious had just shattered beyond repair. The next 3 days were the longest of his life. Vivian didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at the garage with lunch or appear at his apartment door with movies for Austin. The silence was deafening, a void where her presence used to be. Austin asked about her every night, his small face crumbling when Derek couldn't give him answers. Derek went through the motions of living, eating meals he couldn't taste, doing work he couldn't focus on, lying awake at night, staring at the water stains on the ceiling and wondering if he'd done the right thing. On the 4th day, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. 2 words, "Watch this." Below, it was a link to a video stream. Derek clicked the link and found himself looking at a live feed from what appeared to be a corporate boardroom. Vivian sat at the head of a long table, facing a row of men in expensive suits whose expressions ranged from disapproval to outright hostility. The video quality was crisp enough that Derek could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands. "This is your final chance, Miss Rhodes," said a man with silver hair and cold eyes. "End this relationship publicly, or we will move forward with the vote of no confidence." Vivian didn't flinch. "And if I refuse?" "Then you leave us no choice. The board has a responsibility to shareholders. We cannot allow personal indiscretions to jeopardize everything this company has built." Derek watched as Vivian rose from her chair, slowly, deliberately, like a queen ascending her throne. The room fell silent. Even through the screen, Derek could feel the power radiating from her, the force of a woman who had clawed her way to the top of a world that had tried everything to keep her down. 20 years ago, she said, her voice steady and clear. "I started this company in my garage with nothing but a dream and a maxed-out credit card. I worked 18-hour days. I slept on the floor. I ate ramen for 2 years straight because I couldn't afford anything else. I built Rhodes Technologies from nothing, turned it into a company worth billions, employed thousands of people, created products that changed how the world communicates. I did that. Not any of you. Me." She paused, letting the words settle like snow. "You want to know what threatens this company? It's not my relationship with a good man who works hard to provide for his son. It's not the fact that I finally found someone who sees me as a person instead of a stock price. What threatens this company is a board of directors who believe they can control me, who think they have the right to dictate who I love and how I live my life. The silver-haired man opened his mouth to speak, but Vivian cut him off with a gesture. I'm not ending my relationship with Derek Callahan. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. If that's unacceptable to you, then I suggest you proceed with your vote. But know this. If you remove me from this company, I will walk out of this building and start over. I've done it before. I can do it again. And when Rhodes Technologies crumbles without me, when your precious stock prices plummet and your shareholders come for blood, remember this moment. Remember that you chose pride over profit, control over competence. She gathered her papers, tucked them under her arm, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. The board has 1 hour to decide. I'll be in my office. The stream cut off. Derek sat, staring at his phone, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. He didn't know how long he sat there, minutes or hours, before his phone buzzed again with another message from the same number. Come to Rhodes Technologies. Main entrance. Now. The lobby of Rhodes Technologies was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to inspire awe and intimidate visitors in equal measure. Derek walked through the revolving doors in his oil-stained work clothes, drawing stares from the impeccably dressed employees who hurried past with tablets and coffee cups. He didn't care. He walked to the security desk and said Vivian's name, and the guard's eyes widened with recognition. Mr. Callahan, Miss Rhodes is expecting you. Top floor. The elevator rose so fast, Derek's ears popped. When the doors opened, Vivian was waiting for him, her corporate armor discarded in favor of the simple blouse she'd been wearing the night they met. Her eyes were red-rimmed but triumphant, her smile wavering between joy and exhaustion. They backed down, she said. Full board support, unanimous vote of confidence. Apparently, they remembered that I'm the only reason they have jobs. Derek crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, all the tension draining from her body, her face pressed into his shoulder, her hands clutching the fabric of his jacket. You didn't have to do that, he murmured into her hair. You could have lost everything. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce and certain. I could have lost you. That would have been losing everything. I'm just a mechanic. Vivian, you're the man who ran into a dark alley to save a stranger. You're the man who took me into his home and made me tea in chipped cups and showed me what family really looks like. You're the man who taught your son that kindness is more important than success, and that courage isn't the absence of fear but the decision that something else is more important. She pressed her hand against his chest, over his heart. You're the man I love. Everything else is just noise. Derek kissed her then, in the middle of her glass and steel empire, with the city spread out below them like a glittering promise. He kissed her like a man who had finally stopped fighting the current and decided to let the river carry him somewhere new. He kissed her like a man who was learning, slowly and wonderfully, that second chances were real, and that love didn't care about zip codes or bank accounts or any of the walls people built to keep each other out. That evening, Vivian came home with him. Not to her penthouse apartment with its panoramic views and designer furniture, but to his cramped 3-room flat where the elevator didn't work and the heating system wheezed. Austin launched himself at her the moment she walked through the door, wrapping his arms around her waist and announcing that he had prayed every night and God had finally listened. Vivian knelt down and hugged him back, tears streaming down her face, promising him that she wasn't going anywhere. They ordered pizza that night and ate it on the living room floor, watching Austin's favorite movie about a superhero who saved the world with kindness instead of violence. Somewhere around the second slice, Austin fell asleep with his head in Vivian's lap, his small hand still clutching a breadstick. Derek looked at them, his son and this woman who had wandered into his life from another universe entirely, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. I never expected this, Vivian said quietly, stroking Austin's hair. Any of this. Neither did I. That night in the alley, when you appeared out of nowhere and fought off those men, I thought you were some kind of angel. I thought I was dreaming, or dying, or both. I'm no angel. Just a guy who couldn't walk away. She looked at him, her eyes shining in the light from the television. That's what makes you extraordinary, Derek. You couldn't walk away. Most people would have. Most people do. Every single day. When they see someone suffering, they look the other way. They convince themselves it's not their problem. They protect their own comfort at the expense of someone else's pain. But you ran toward the danger. You risked yourself for a stranger. You didn't ask what you would get in return. I got more than I ever imagined. So did I, she whispered. So did I. 6 months later, Vivian sold her penthouse and moved into a brownstone in a neighborhood halfway between Derek's old apartment and her office. It had a backyard where Austin could play, a garage where Derek could tinker on weekends, and enough bedrooms for the family they were building together. She didn't quit her job, but she changed how she did it, leaving the office at reasonable hours, delegating more responsibility, creating a culture that valued people over profit. Derek didn't quit his job either, though he transferred to a shop closer to their new home, one where he could be his own boss and set his own hours. On a warm Sunday afternoon, Vivian and Derek sat on the back porch, watching Austin chase fireflies in the fading light. The boys' laughter echoed across the yard, pure and uncontained, the sound of a child who had never known a day without love. "I've been thinking," Vivian said, reaching for Derek's hand, "about that night." "Which one?" "The alley. The moment you decided to help me instead of walking away." Derek squeezed her hand. "What about it?" "I keep wondering what would have happened if you hadn't been there. If you'd taken a different route home. If you'd been 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later. I try not to think about that. I know. But I can't help it." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You saved my life, Derek. Not just in that alley, but every day since. You saved me from a life where I had everything and felt nothing. You showed me that success without love is just elegant loneliness. You gave me a family." Derek pulled her close, pressing his lips to her temple. "You gave me the same thing, Vivian. You showed me that dreams don't have to die just because life gets hard. You showed Austin that kindness comes back around, even when the world tries to convince us otherwise." Austin came running toward them, his hands cupped around a glowing firefly. "Look, I caught one. Can I keep it?" "Let me see," Vivian said, leaning forward to peer at the tiny light pulsing between Austin's fingers. "You know what, buddy? I think this little guy probably has a family waiting for him somewhere. Maybe a mom firefly and a dad firefly who are wondering where he went. What do you think we should do?" Austin considered this with the gravity only a 7-year-old could muster. "We should let him go home," he decided. "Everyone should be with their family." He opened his hands, and the firefly rose into the darkening sky, its light blinking like a tiny beacon of hope ascending toward the stars. Austin watched it go with a smile on his face, then turned and climbed into Derek's lap, reaching out to pull Vivian closer until all three of them were tangled together on the porch swing. "Dad?" Austin said sleepily. "Yeah. Buddy, I'm glad you saved Miss Vivian." Derek looked at the woman beside him, at the life they had built from the wreckage of 2 broken paths. "Me too, buddy. Me too." The fireflies danced in the yard. The stars emerged one by one, and somewhere in the city, 100 dark alleys waited for heroes who might never come. But in this small corner of the world, on a porch swing in a brownstone backyard, 3 people who had found each other against all odds sat together and watched the night arrive, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Some people spend their whole lives searching for miracles in grand gestures and dramatic moments, but Derek Callahan had learned that the greatest miracles often begin with the smallest choices, the decision to turn down a dark alley, to extend a hand to a stranger, to believe that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil. He had risked everything to save a woman he didn't know, and she had repaid him with something more valuable than money or status or any of the things the world told him to want. She had given him hope. She had given him family. She had given him a future he'd stopped believing was possible. And that, in the end, was the most unexpected gift of all. Years from now, when Austin was grown and had children of his own, he would tell them the story of how his father saved a stranger in a dark alley. He would tell them about the woman who could have had anything in the world but chose their tiny apartment and their chipped teacups and their imperfect, beautiful life. He would tell them that heroes don't wear capes or fly through the sky. Heroes wear work boots and grease-stained jackets. Heroes show up when no one else will. Heroes risk everything for strangers because that's simply who they are. And if his children were lucky, if the universe was kind, they would grow up to be heroes too, not because it was easy, but because it was right. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden Vivian had planted, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. Derek closed his eyes and listened to the sound of his family breathing beside him, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be.